And running here. Welcome back to Free Speech TV. We have got a tremendous guest to follow up on the topic that I was just talking about. The righties love their combat sports. And we have got a great guest with us today. He joins us live here on our big program. And he recently wrote a article for thehill.com. Trump and the UFC and the new conservative culture war. Reese Peck joins us here on Skype. He's an associate professor at CUNY Graduate Center. And he has written an incredible book about how Fox News has kind of rebranded the conservative culture into the working man's culture, which I hope we get a chance to talk a little bit about the book as well, because I've read the book and I love the book. But this article that you wrote, how I got wind of this is I had several people send this to me, and then I seen you on David Pakman's show. And so I just had to have you on our program. And I appreciate you making some time for us, and thanks for coming on the program here today, Reese.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So let's talk about this column. Why did you decide to write this?
You know, I've always been fascinated by the link between pop culture and politics. So I came of age in the Bush era. So when I, was an undergrad in college, I distinctly remember the buildup of the Iraq War and the role that country music played in supporting that war with Toby Keith and all these patriotic songs. I grew up with country music. My brother's a country music singer. And it bothered me because on one hand, I was against the invasion. I knew it was wrong and, just stupid. And but at the other hand, it bothered me that the music I love was being used to kind of legitimate it.
Yep.
And so that got me thinking of the deeper question about what is the connection between partisanship and taste, between kind of culture and political identity. And the UFC is just another extension of that, right? It's not music, but it's sports. And,
yes.
And I see Trump in a very savvy way, in a very strategic way, reaching out to this entertainment genre in order to kind of convert its audience, which is apolitical supposedly, right, into a political audience. And I think a lot of the greatest politicians in American history have understood the power of entertainment and pop culture as a political resource. Alabama Governor George Wallace used to plan his campaign rallies using the radio demographic data from country music stations.
Oh, so, really?
Yeah. And
that is very interesting.
And you can go deeper. Even more progressive Democrats in the early 20th century would bring a fiddle to their rallies, right? And so there was fiddling politicians and country music singers, and and we just see this over and over again. But I think the UFC is such, I'm a lifelong fan. I was came from a wrestling family. All I cared about was wrestling when I was in another life, when I was younger. And I've always been a fan of the UFC. And again, it's something that I like, but I'm seeing kind of weaponized to support politics I don't necessarily agree with, or that I think are counterproductive or harmful. So that's what motivated me to write that piece. And also I just think from a journalistic perspective, people are sleeping on it. I don't know why it's not being covered. I mean, he attended 6 separate pay-per-view events in this election cycle. Right. So even if you're a Democratic strategist, you may want to pay attention to what the opposition is doing and consider it. But it seems like it's just an overlooked story.
Oh, yeah. The fact that Colby Covington did an interview at Mar-a-Lago with ESPN. That should just scare the crap out of the Democrats because, first of all, I'm not a real big Colby Covington fan. I think he's kind of like the Wish or Temu equivalent of Conor McGregor. But they had to have, set that up, put that all together. The fact that Trump, as you mentioned, has been to multiple UFC events. And the fact that, what was it? I think it was either a New Jersey event they did recently, or maybe it was the last time they were in Madison Square Garden. He came through the entrance area with Kid Rock and Tucker Carlson, which that whole Tucker thing, I still think that is the craziest deal. Where Tucker can't stand this guy. But yet, he's best buddies. Going to UFCs with him. First of all, I don't think Tucker would even. First of all, as the great professional wrestling manager Jim Cornette would say, I can almost guarantee you that Tucker Carlson does not know what a wrist lock and a wrist watch are. But the fact that Tucker and Kid Rock and Trump and all these guys. Now, granted, I can almost guarantee you this was a business decision rather than a I'm going to stand on my morals culture type decision. But I will have to give Trump a little bit of credit. He was one of the first people back in the era where it was human cockfighting and we were throwing UFC out of every single place, and they were doing shows in Dothan, Alabama in a tent. He did let him go to a couple of his casinos in New Jersey. However,
that's correct. Yeah, the Taj Mahal, Atlantic City, 2001,
yes.
UFC 31, I believe.
I believe so.
The first, those were the first mainstream venues that the UFC was able to achieve in the critical early years of its infancy, when it really was at this breaking point. Is it going to succeed or fail? It's not that, But
I think it was a business decision. I think somebody got to him and said, this is the hot thing, man. You need to bring this in. But maybe you could say, Trump's been a fan forever. It's been a UFC mark forever, but that Trump doesn't do anything unless it's money related.
I don't think it's either or. I mean, it can be both, right? I think Trump has been a fight fan for a long time.
Yes.
He has been, he's a character in the WWE universe.
He's in the Hall of Fame, for God's sakes, in the WWE.
Yeah.
So
that's right. So I don't think, I think that he was a fan, but I just think really it was the 2016 moment that changed everything. Right?
Yes.
It was when Dana White spoke at the RNC convention in 2016 that he injected the UFC brand into the world of electoral politics. I mean, before that, he was complaining about fighters talking about their religion and their post-fight interviews and their politics. And he disciplined fighters like Mitrione and Nate Diaz for saying gay slurs or trans slurs.
Oh, yeah.
And then keep in mind, we just, throughout his presidency, he was complaining, and his followers are complaining about Kaepernick and about progressives injecting politics and ruining sports. So it's kind of rich, that the same people that were complaining about that are now wearing MAGA hats, and their entire fighter persona is about a political party, right? So, and like you said, Tucker Carlson, Kid Rock, and Trump, when they entered Madison Square Garden, I think it was UFC 295, this was in November of last year, even the announcer, you could tell they choreographed it, because the announcer said they enter, they come out into the arena, there's close-ups of all their faces, and the announcer says, "Look at that team," or he said something like that. He was literally co-branding, Trump, Kid Rock's conservative music, Tucker Carlson's political conservative commentary. It was this amazing moment of cross promotion, and it's completely conscious and intentional. So again, it's rich when they're complaining that about politics and sports, but I mean, it's so obviously politically motivated. But I think you're right. There's always a business dimension to it as well.
Well, right? and I the big lie that everybody says with Trump is that he never started any new wars. And he was all anti-war. Well, he said at one point that the only reason he doesn't go to war is because it doesn't have any financial benefit to me. And I always used to say, you know, if somebody wanted him to really go to war, he's just told you how to do it. Make a random donation to one of his charities.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, amazingly, he drops some bombs on whatever Middle Eastern country you want him to drop bombs on the following day.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, he's Trump's ideology is money and
yes,
himself. It's not there is no intellectual core to it. You know, I've studied the history of the intellectual conservative movement, history of kind of progressive intellectuals. I mean, there's no there when it comes to an actual ideological core. I mean, he just has been doing these kind of circuits to get money from billionaire donors, and he'll immediately flip depending on what the donor issue is. He'll, you know, he just said that he's okay with immigrants getting visas if they have a diploma. I mean, that's even to the left of what the Democratic Party was saying.
Wow.
You know, so like he'll flip on a dime depending on the donor. The tech industry he's bemoaned, and then now that Peter Thiel and all these other tech billionaires are giving donations, and he totally does the policy they want. So, well,
my favorite, I think it was last election cycle. He was on stage somewhere doing one of his mark events where he gets up. I've always thought he should have. Somebody should have went to him and said, you know, if you charge money and do these rallies and sell merch, you could just cut promos, because he just likes cutting promos. That's all he likes doing. He just likes getting up there and talking smack on people. But he was at a rally and he was yelling and screaming about he's got this deep-seated hatred for wind energy. I did some research and finally found out why that was. Apparently there was a wind energy company that wanted to build on one of his golf courses. They wanted to put windmills, and he turned them down, and they were like, okay, so they went across the street, and that golf course is making like millions now. And so he's got to, every time he goes and plays that course, he has to look across the street and see all that money that walked out the door. But he was yelling and screaming at a rally about wind energy and solar. And solar was ruining the planet, and solar was doing this. And then halfway through, someone I don't know if they went and passed him a note. I don't know. This was amazing. He turns mid-speech because someone had told him that the candidate that he was there to support got money from the solar folks in that area. And all of a sudden he turns and he goes, yeah, solar's good, but that wind energy. So yeah, it's all money driven. We have got a fantastic guest with us today. He joins us live here on Free Speech TV. Reese Beck. Fox Populism is the latest book from him. He has an article that we're talking about today that was on thehill.com about the right wing and the MMA world. One of the things, as I was getting ready for this interview today, that I had pop into my head was, and I'm assuming he's a right winger, just because he's got the makeup to be a right winger. But Brock Lesnar, at one point, when he had that emergency surgery for diverticulitis, he praised the Canadian healthcare system and said that if it wasn't for the Canadian healthcare system, he would be dead. But yet, all the righties yell and scream about all this socialist medicine all the time. Did Brock realize that they have government healthcare in Canada? Or I don't know. It just popped into my head when we were getting ready to do this interview today, and I was like, Brock at one point.
Yeah, it makes me recall the famous sign at the Tea Party rally in 2009 that said, get the government off my Medicare, or something, keep the government hands off my Medicare.
That's amazing.
It's a similar contradiction. But one thing that's interesting about Trump is that even differing from the Tea Party era and the Ted Cruz kind of brand of republicanism, of the Paul Ryan, because those guys are like Ayn Rand, free market,
Yes.
Fundamentalists. They really believed in, anything that's against any sort of social welfare, public resources. Everything should be privatized, right? Everything should be driven by the market. Trump is distinct in that way, in that he's not really, even though he's like a businessman and that's part of his political brand, in his first 2016 campaign, he kind of flirted that he would offer universal health care. And he'll say these kind of things,
Yes.
like rhetoric that's anti-corporate, that makes the more Koch brother wing like uncomfortable, or protectionist policies that they don't like, that are the Romneys of the world wouldn't like. And it's really funny how just devoid of almost like those issues of the previous era that Trump, he's not even talking about it. So it's really like this culture war that Trump's really good at, is like skewering liberals and woke culture and all that. And that seems to be the center stage with Trump.
We have got a great guest with us today, and you need to check out Reese's article in thehill.com about the righties and the UFC guys. One of the things that I have started noticing this over the last year and a half. We go cover local MMA events. I'll do backstage interviews with fighters, or, go into the gym on 2 or 3 times a week. Why in the world did all the right wing or more conservative people, why are they in pro wrestling, boxing, MMA? Because it seems like, especially when I go to pro wrestling events, backstage, they're all righties. They're all yelling and screaming about Joe Biden. Joe Biden's ruining the country and all these things. How did this become? How did that world get into the whole combat sports thing?
I mean, it's a very complicated question to answer. Drawing from my own background, I was a wrestler, standout wrestler in my high school. I come from a wrestling family. Utah is a rural state. And usually a lot of wrestlers come from rural states, and rural states or blue collar states tend to be conservative.
Yes.
The flyover
they're
country,
all righties.
it's the Iowa. What was that?
It seems like they're all in that area. You mentioned Iowa. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. Michigan, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, like these are all the places that draw wrestling talent, right? And really the wrestlers have dominated MMA for decades now. Once
Kevin Randleman, Mark Coleman, hell, Rock's making a movie about Mark Kerr right now, which I find a little odd, but okay.
Right, Daniel, you could go on and on. And so I think that's part of it, it really is. You just got to think about where wrestlers come from and where that sport is popular, what states wrestling is revered in. And it tends to be rural. I grew up in Salt Lake City, so I was wrestling the country kids. The best schools were in the country. The best schools are in the middle of nowhere in Utah. Those are always the scariest wrestling schools. So I think that's part of the answer. I think we associate with aggressive masculinity with conservatism. Right. I mean, the beginning of the UFC, it wasn't explicitly partisan like it became post 2016 Trump, but it was implicitly conservative. They had military advertising and recruitment, the Hooters ads. It is kind of like Barstool Sports before Barstool Sports. It's a celebration of like traditional masculinity.
Yes.
So there's a part of that. But I also think part of it is manufactured that it's conservative because, Dana White will, when you have conservative political views, those fighters are encouraged to talk about politics. But there are tons of silent progressive fighters, right? You don't know that there's progressive fighters in the UFC because either they're internalized that it would hurt their brand if they brought up their progressive politics because of the audience, or Dana White, they're afraid of management, like, censoring them or hurting their career in some sort of way. So you have people like I think it's Kevin Lee, right, was at a Bernie rally.
Yes.
Or you have Bisbing, right, that is anti-Tory in the UK context.
Yeah.
Paddy Timblett and I forgot McCain.
Yeah.
These British fighters that are anti-Tory, which is the Tory is the Republican Party of the UK. But you never hear, they're not platformed, right? They're never like, their political values are not part of their persona, where with the Covingtons of the world and the Sean Stricklands of the world, they're all about, like, their entire brand is being anti-woke and anti-Biden, you know. And so I think that's part of it. There's a little bit of it that is media constructed.
Oh, I would love to see a UFC fighter at the end of, when he's doing his post-fight interview, bring up Medicare for all. That would be the greatest thing ever. Paid family leave, you know, something. But Uncle Dana's not going to let that happen.
Well, it's been interesting to see with the Gaza-Israeli conflict that a lot of these Dagestani and Russian fighters that are Muslim have said free Palestine and stuff. And you can kind of feel Dana White getting uneasy about that. I mean, a lot of these fighters, it's a global sport. So they don't always share the political line of both the parties in the United States in terms of that conflict.
Yes.
And so there's been something like that has been interesting to watch. But that doesn't really fit in our kind of Democrat, Republican binary that we have here in the United States. There more global kind of politics come into play at the UFC. Well,
speaking of global, you know, if you listen to the conspiracy guys, the Alex Joneses, all these guys, they talk about the globalists and all these people. And one of the big things that they love to talk about is that Biden and the Democrats are opening up the borders and letting all these Hispanic people and people from other countries and Latin America, and oh my God, they're just invading the United States, and they're all going to become Biden voters. And the last election, I'm not sure what the news outlet was, but they did a poll, and they found out that a lot of the Latin America and Hispanic voters, some of them were Trump fans.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation with someone, ironically, at the gym one time. And he was talking about how, this, Biden this, Biden that, and was just putting over Biden. And he was saying, well, you know, he's real good with the Hispanic, you know, culture. And I said, have you watched Hispanic TV? The novellas? Not so much soccer, because those guys get like a tap on the shoulder and they fall down like they've been shot. But the novellas, Lucha Libre, they all are attracted to strong, you know, male figures. And yes. Regardless of what, I've always thought Trump was a fake tough guy. I always thought Chris Christie was a fake tough guy. But they see Trump on stage, and he's, you know, doing all the stuff that he's doing, and they're attracted to that because they see that in their culture. Talk to us a little bit about that, how he kind of plays into that, along with the whole UFC thing of being a fake tough guy with the MMA guys.
Yeah, I mean, there's a host of marquee fighters that are Latino, right? You have Masvidal.
Oh, I was getting ready to say George Masvidal.
Yeah, he held a Fighters Against Socialism event in Florida with Senator Rubio, and Don Jr. was there. I mean, you have,
of course,
Cejudo.
Don Jr. was
one of my
there.
favorite fighters of all time, sadly, where there's dissonance with his politics, is Henry Cejudo. And I believe he's in Arizona, and he went to Trump rallies. You have Tito Ortiz, the old.
Oh, Tito! Have you ever seen the video of Tito? I had to go look this up after Tank Abbott talked about it on, I believe it was Rampage Jackson's show, where Tito was reciting some sort of, I don't know if it was the Constitution, I don't know what it was, but they had made him mayor. And he was reading this long, drawn-out thing, and you could clearly tell the people that were in the background and the people that were in the audience were like, oh no, what have we done? Why is he the mayor now?
Yeah, I think he was a Huntington Beach council member.
Yes.
Yeah, he ran on Make Huntington Beach Safe Again. So he's literally invoking Trump's slogan. But yeah, I mean, I think that this broader point that you're bringing up about the great replacement theory that you see in the rhetoric of Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones and InfoWars for years, it has a fundamental flaw to it. And the flaw is this. It assumes that immigrants that come here have some baked-in politics, like they're immutable, like they can't be converted, or that they're like automatically liberal or progressive.
Yes.
I mean, and if your audience has ever seen Gangs of New York, right, and they see Bill the Butcher and his in the mid 1800s. Where you have these Native American groups, not indigenous Native Americans, but the white Protestants that were against these Irish immigrants and against the Italian immigrants. I live in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn now, South Brooklyn. All those immigrants that they said was going to take over America and ruin our Protestant, democracy, all those Irish and Italians are deeply Republican, right? So it's this idea that, and Trump is increasingly gaining support with Hispanic voters, and it's particularly ones with non-college educated working class. So it's just a flawed thing that they're going to come to this country and just automatically like be the tools and puppets of the Democratic Party, and they are as persuadable as any other group. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a racist kind of logic. You're assuming there's something essential about their race that links up to their political beliefs.
Yes.
Right? People are more complicated than that. They're not monoliths. They don't work that way. And so, yeah, I think it's but you hear this narrative over and over again about that. If the Republicans were smart, which some of them are in terms of their operatives, they're actively courting Hispanic Americans, and they realize that they can be turned into an important part of the conservative movement's coalition.
We have got a tremendous guest with us today here on Free Speech TV. Reese Peck is with us. He has written an incredible article on thehill.com about the UFC and the right wing and how the righties have sort of just taken over the UFC and MMA in general. We were talking about earlier about Trump was one of the first guys to have it at the Taj Mahal. Well, not a lot of people. I'm sure you know this. What I'm getting ready to tell you. I'm sure you know this story. But how Dana and the crew got their hands on the UFC? That's a typical Republican right wing Trump backdoor business thing. Bob Merowitz from SEG Entertainment, who was, on his last legs with the UFC. They had been banned everywhere, and they were on DirecTV, and that wasn't getting a lot of traction. And he goes in front of the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and he has this list of rules and weight classes and everything that they had been doing. And he had Larry Hazard from the New Jersey Athletic Commission, as one of his supporters. And he was like, I'm on my last legs. If you guys don't approve this and sanction us as a sport, I'm probably going to have to sell the company. And then, of course, they didn't. However, the Fertittas, who were on the commission, amazingly resigned the very next day. And then they got with their friend Dana White, and they approached Bob Merowitz with an offer, and they bought the UFC. And now it's the biggest thing on the planet. And about, 5-10 years ago, they sold it for $1 billion. Come on. Yeah. That isn't corruption.
That's right. I didn't know that. I didn't know about the Fertitta brothers that were on the licensing.
Yes. They were on the Nevada State Athletic Commission.
Wow.
And they, one of the Fertittas was on the commission. The other owned a bunch of the casinos, the station casinos, and their buddy Dana White, who was a boxercise instructor. He was all of a sudden they buy the UFC, and then Trump's like, "Hey, I'll put it in the Taj Mahal," and that's when they had the new graphics, and amazingly, Chuck and Tito started getting pushed, and they were the big stars of the UFC. All the you could write a book on the corruption of the UFC in these early days.
For sure. But I mean, I think even if you set that aside, I think one of the key flashpoints of UFC history in this broader trajectory of mainstreaming it and having it be successful was the Spike TV reality show.
Yes. Oh, very much so.
Oh, go ahead.
Very much so. Yes.
People forget that Sly Stallone had a boxing reality show.
The Contender.
It's called The Contender.
Yes. I see it still in reruns on like Pluto TV every once in a while.
Yeah, and it's like basically Dana and the Fertittas just copied it, like directly copied that. And that was like, that really was a game changer in terms of mainstreaming it. And then all of a sudden they're getting deals on Fox Network.
Yes.
Remember the first fight was Dos Santos and King Velasquez.
Yes.
Which was a bad coming about party because he got knocked out in like 40 seconds or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think, from that point on, but I still would say that the brand of it was implicitly conservative because it was associated with alpha male culture. And all that.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, but it wasn't explicitly partisan. And I think what makes the UFC unique is that it's always had this countercultural niche kind of quality to it.
Yes.
Because with most sports, the reason why you don't want to go partisan or you don't want to fold your league brand into a partisan brand is because you want to maximize your audience. It's basic business economics, right? Like, you don't want to scare away. Michael Jordan famously said Republicans buy shoes too. So that's that old logic of the network era when they're, on cable. I'm sorry, in the network broadcasting era. But once you get to cable, it's niche. It's people have a channel for Animal Planet. They have a channel for cooking. They have a channel for health. And they have a channel for their political party with Fox News and MSNBC. So I think the fact that the UFC lived in the margins, in the shadows for so long and had to exist without enjoying this mass appeal because it literally couldn't get on air because it was banned because the McCains of the world and saying that it's human cockfighting.
The ABC 2020 where they well, and even to the UFC's credit, they I'm trying to remember what UFC it was because I watched after Tank Abbott's been making his media tour, and he was talking about how Kevin Randleman got screwed when he fought Boss Root, and I'm like, I've never seen that fight. I need to go watch it. Yes, Kevin Randleman did get screwed because as a wrestler, and you will appreciate this as being an amateur wrestler, how in the world do you double leg or single leg some guy for 45 minutes? Every time they got on their feet, he single leg and double legs him. He gets on top of him. He's pounding him the whole way. He almost broke it. I think he broke his nose in the very first 5 minutes of the fight. And then amazingly at the end of the fight, because they wanted Boss Rutan to win, amazingly Boss Rutan beats Kevin Randleman by justice decision.
What was that? I couldn't hear it at the end.
Kevin Randleman lost to Boss Rutan after spending 45 minutes of double-legging and single-legging him through the whole fight. But amazingly, Boss Rutan fought off his back and won.
Did he get knocked out, or it was just a bad decision?
It was a bad decision.
Oh.
If you get a chance, in fact, if I can find it on YouTube, I will email you the link so you can watch it. It is amazing. And Kevin Randleman, he was a freaking monster back in the day. Ironically, that was his gimmick. And that's all he did to Boss Rutan. But what I was trying to set up there was the UFC's logo changed over the years. And it went from being, the big hulking, bald white guy to, at one point, he was a smiling, like Mr. Clean looking guy who had a belt. Because they're like,
no,
we're a real sport.
Remember that, huh?
So even, the changing of the guard on all this. One of the things that I do want to talk to you about, Reese, here is, and you brought this up a few seconds ago, with the fact that there are Democrat, progressive, I wish there was more progressive people in the whole, mix with the UFC. But what exactly can progressives in sports or in general do to turn the tide on some of these things? Because I am a huge fan of Cenk Uygur and the Young Turks, and Cenk constantly says, when you poll the progressive talking points, paid family leave, Medicare for all, when you poll these things with people love those policies. I remember, and I bring this up all the time to the righties on my radio show, which they don't like, but MSNBC and Fox News on election night were doing exit polls, and they were asking people, what are some of the things that you went in and you voted on? And a lot of it was Medicare for all. A lot of it was, all the various things. Well, once they started getting these results back, they were like, okay, we're done talking to these people. And that was both across the board. MSNBC, Fox News, they're like, okay, we're done talking to these people. What can progressives do to get that message out more? Because I was a huge Bernie fan, but I felt the same way with Bernie that I did when Ralph Nader ran, where they've got a lot of good ideas, but they're just not the vehicle to get the job done.
Yeah. Well, I would say that, so Cenk is 100% right, that and you'll encounter this with your conservative relatives or conservative fighters or whatever. You'll say, yeah, the rich should pay more taxes. And they're like, yeah, they should. That's a conservative position. I'm like, no, that's not. That's a historically progressive position. Or they'll say that, we need manufacturing. Well, that's the labor movement and unions that have fought for manufacturing and to have tariffs. Yes. And, so they often, I think a lot of conservatives don't really understand the policy package that they're signing up for when they vote Republican. I think what they're looking at is they despise liberals and liberal culture. So what motivates their ideology is their disgust for, rightfully so, these people that look down on a lot of ordinary people. And they don't like the academic campus-based culture and its language.
Yes.
And they see it as condescending. And so that's what animates them. But they don't understand that conservatives are stoking that resentment.
Very much so.
And then directing it toward policies that deregulate the economy, that lower taxes on rich people, that hurt unions, that, ruin the minimum wage, that privatize healthcare. And so I think, one thing that from that I think progressives need to understand is that you can say how logical your economic policies are till you're red in the face. But if you don't understand that sports and music and video games are often the first entry point for young men particularly, and young women, into the world of media, right? That's the beginning point, and then that goes toward politics eventually, and that's what the right is so good at doing. Andrew Tate, the most Googled person in 2022 or 2023.
I still don't understand.
He's a social currency because he's a kickboxer.
Yes.
And he's a ass. And then young men, and then all of a sudden he starts talking about the society and about the labor market and about women and gender. And now he's pushing young men to have these political views, right? But it didn't start there. And so I think if liberals say fighting is beneath them, it's so vulgar, NFL is beneath them, well, you've just taken a huge sector of our media off the table. As far as you're recruiting people. If you look down on sports and you look down on MMA, and I keep trying to tell other liberals, there's nothing inherently reactionary about boxing, about wrestling, about any of these subcultures, right? They could be progressive or conservative. They're up for grabs. But because you're not even contesting them and you don't care about them,
Yes.
the right swoops in without a counter narrative. There is no counter narrative because liberals don't care about these cultures. And so that's a major problem for me. You can't just spout, we have the best policies, they're the most logical, they'll help you out. There has to be a cultural strategy to your economic strategy. And I think the right understands that and the left does not.
We have got a tremendous guest with us today. Reese Peck is with us. He has written a article for thehill.com about the UFC and the right-wing culture. Also, he has written a book, Fox Populism, which is an amazing read. I've read the book, and I hope we have a little bit of time here to discuss with him about that book. But something that I do on a regular basis, just because I don't like listening to one side and going, well, that other side's crazy. So I'll listen to the Alex Joneses. I'll listen to the Cenk Uygurs. And there was one day, and I wish to God I would have recorded this or tracked this down, because I quote this all the time. There was one day where I was listening to Alex Jones, and he was talking about how corporate overlords have taken over democracy. And I'm like, what did he just say? And then later on that evening, at 6 o'clock Eastern, I hear Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian talking about how democracy has become held hostage by corporate interests. And I'm like, they've said the exact same thing. What do you make of this? How do we get... Because, like, you brought up the Tea Party earlier. I remember before the Tea Party got kidnapped by Glenn Beck and the rest of those crazies over at Fox, they were about, people paying their taxes, corporations, all these various things, and then somewhere along the way, Glenn Beck and his little crew snuck in there, and all of a sudden it became about race and all these other things, and then it failed. They're so close. The progressive movement, and I don't know what you'd want to call them, because they're not like the MAGA movement, but I guess maybe, lack of a better term, conservative movement. They both have the same ideas. Every once in a while. Yeah. What in the world can we do to get those two together?
It's very astute of you. I mean, two fronts that you recognize that in Alex Jones's rhetoric, because I think a lot of people just focus on the lizard people
yes.
and the water making the frogs gay.
Yes.
If you actually watch Alex Jones, once you get past those sensational elements that are used for viral strategy,
yes,
you realize that he's talking a lot about corporate power, and he's talking a lot about the economy. And that's part of the reason why he's appealing. And it's because people do feel, rightfully so, that corporations have captured their government and they puppet politicians. And that is what Cenk Uygur and the TYT will say, right? I mean, I think the difference is, though, at the end of the day, Alex Jones of the world, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, because I have a piece actually on Tucker Carlson where I argue that he kind of appropriated some of Alex Jones's rhetoric about anti-corporate. So
very much so. They all steal from Alex, Glenn Beck, all of them.
They really do. They call him crazy, and then they take his secret sauce.
That's right.
But Tucker, I showed this segment where Tucker does a complete segment called The Unfree Market. And it's all about the greed of Uber not paying its employees, about the greed of Walmart, that they pay their employees so little that they have to rely on government assistance, and that they're the welfare queens. I mean, that is right out of a leftist playbook. I mean, that is a left argument. But then he pivots and he says it's these immigrants that are the problem. And now he'll do the same thing. And the left doesn't do that. They don't punch down. The right will punch up and then they'll punch down at the same time. And so I think you're right that they're so close. I mean, they're flirting with these kind of anti-capitalist critiques. And they try to contain them by blaming them on immigrants and other things and culture war stuff, and that women have too much power now and all this stuff. But they're very close. And the Tea Party did not have that. Much of my book is about the Tea Party era. I interviewed activists. I studied Fox's programming in this period, really looking at Glenn Beck. And in that era, they're protecting corporations.
Yes.
They're trying to say the CEO is your friend. He's actually a super worker, CEOs are.
He's a super worker. That is awesome.
That's how they framed it. The job creator, right? The job creator was to valorize the rich. But if you fast forward to Alex Jones in the Trump era, the right is increasingly not about that kind of rhetoric anymore. They're really trying to paint themselves as we are the ones fighting corporate power. We are the ones against it. If you hate corporations, you should be conservative. And that's an exceptionally dangerous thing for the left. For the right to win the argument that we're the only ones fighting against corporate power, that bodes very well for the conservative movement. And the problem is TYT is a minority in the broader chorus of progressive voices, in that the mainstream Democratic channels like MSNBC, they're not engaging in anti-corporate rhetoric. I mean, they were just bragging that Trump didn't get endorsed by any Fortune 500 company. Like, who would brag about that? You're basically saying that Trump didn't get any of the elite corporate power people that like him. Like, you're giving him a
We're disappointed by it.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, the Democrats, I mean, even with the security state, where now they're the friend of the CIA, now they're the friend of the FBI. It's just...
They just put... Who was it? They just put somebody who used to be in the CIA on the board of ChatGPT. I'm sure that's going to go well.
Yeah. And this is just ripe territory for anti-establishment, anti-corporate kind of politics, populist politics. And the Democrats have always just seemed averse to populism. They're not going back to their roots in the FDR party. In the 1930s, the Democrats... Oh,
the scam they just ran on Jamal Bowman when they got him out in his primary, where all of a sudden Hillary came out and all these various people, oh my God, we've got to do this primary. When Bernie was running in a primary, it's like, primaries are bad. You need to fall in line. But now primaries are awesome when we're getting rid of progressive.
Right. You're a traitor if you're challenging an incumbent that's part of the establishment wing.
Yes.
You're a traitor to the party. But if you're part of the establishment wing and you're challenging an incumbent, then you're great. And they're calling Bowman MAGA. I mean, talk about an interesting case study. Is finally you get a progressive that is kind of making appeals to men, and to a degree. He's bench pressing like 400 pounds.
Yes.
He's got big guns. He's got Wu-Tang Clan shirts on. You know, you finally get like a populist, like an African American, like working class style.
Yeah.
And what are the first thing they do is completely destroy
Get rid of this guy. Get the hook is what they used to do in the 50s. Get the hook. Get him off stage. He's done.
It's unbelievable. You know, it's really unbelievable. And that's a perfect case where they're just really averse to populism. It's few and far between where you have the party support that. Where on the right, it's the complete opposite. The leading figures of the party are the most populist ones.
Yes.
The ones that have the most visibility are the most populist ones, not the technocrats, not the kind of boring Mitt Romney model or the Paul Ryan model. So it makes me shake my head.
We have got a great guest with us today. He joins us here on Free Speech TV, Reese Peck. Fox Populism was a book that he wrote about, like you just mentioned, a little bit about the Tea Party and Glenn Beck. One of the things that I've always, with the Tea Party and even with Occupy Wall Street, they did not have a leader. They did not have like a central leader, and so it devoided into chaos, like with Occupy Wall Street. It was a whole bunch of people that were mad at corporations. And then at some point, because they didn't have a leader and their message kind of got all over the place. Then it just became, a bunch of homeless people and some college kids sleeping in their tents down at Wall Street. Tea Party was the complete opposite. They had a message, but they didn't have a leader. And because they didn't have a leader, Glenn Beck and the Fox News crew could kind of come in and take that over. Talk to me a little bit about that aspect, because I remember watching the Tea Party. In fact, I went and covered several local Tea Party rallies for local TV that I was involved with. And it was all sorts of people. It was liberals, it was progressives, it was Democrats, it was Republicans, everybody. Everybody from every type of libertarians, everybody was there. And then Glenn Beck and Fox News snuck in nationally. And then all of a sudden, the local Tea Party, like for instance, there still is a local Tea Party in a town that I lived in by the name of Salina, Kansas, and they have this Tea Party movement, and they call themselves, they're a whole bunch of elderly women. They call themselves the Granny Brigade, but realistically, they're all just bitter conservatives. Why in the world did the Tea Party start out and then get held hostage and taken over by old Beckles and the crew?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated story. You know, the left version of the Tea Party, or I'd say the MSNBC kind of take on it, was that it was AstroTurf. There was nothing organic about it. It was just completely a Koch brothers manufactured movement, and that is a cartoonish and inaccurate assessment of what the Tea Party was. I attended the Koch brother Americans for Prosperity conferences.
I bet those were fun.
Yeah, and they were training, to your point. I remember I was in a room that was like how to use Twitter. And this is like 2010. And it was like all these like adorable old ladies with like American flag sequence sweaters on, like learning to be activists and use Twitter. But the other part that's also false, that it was purely organic and it was purely grassroots, that was the Fox News version of it. And in Fox News, the Tea Party Fox News marriage is an unprecedented event in the history of American media. Because up to that point, a national media corporation had never put its arms around a street protest movement. Yes. Usually street protest movements are crushed or delegitimated.
Get them out of here. Yep.
Yeah. The anti-war, there's a famous book called The Whole World is Watching by Todd Gitlin, and he talks about who was a leader of the Students for a Democratic Society, the anti-war protests of the late 60s against the Vietnam War. In his book, he shows how the network news just systematically either ignored the movement or discredited them, right? They'd find the biggest freak hippie to interview and say that's the movement. And then for most Americans, that became their image of the movement in their mind, because all they could see was the media. So I think the Tea Party, I mean, having a national media platform is absolutely essential for any movement to succeed. If it coordinates the message, it keeps the message on track. And I think, you know, I have this clip on my YouTube page where I show the only time MSNBC tried to do what Fox News did was with Ed Schultz, who was the only populist host.
I was a huge Ed Schultz mark. I will have to say, I was a huge Ed Schultz guy back in the day. And
me too.
I hated what they ended up doing to him over there.
Yeah. He was getting ratings that were as good as Rachel Maddow, and Ed Schultz went to the Occupy Wall Street. It's so telling of like left movements and some of their wrong-headed thinking about movements, is that he went to an Occupy Wall Street movement and the crowd booed him because he was part of the corporate media, right? Here you have a guy that could have promoted in a positive way your message, but you booed him, and that was the last time he tried that. Where when he did union protests in Wisconsin, they cheered him because those are older voters, union firefighters, cops, teachers. They understand the older left actually embraced like institutional organization. Like the civil rights movement was extremely organized and hierarchical, where there's this new left fantasy a romance about like the leaderless movement and it's horizontal and everyone has a voice. That's not how movements really work and are effective. And to kind of like say we don't need a figurehead. Well, yeah, you do. Look how successful.
Yeah, you do.
Right? Yeah. Like, I mean, it's in the Tea Party, unlike the left, their whole goal from the beginning was capture the Republican Party. Their whole goal, they kept their eye on the prize. Let's take over the government. How do we take over the party and then take over the government? Where Occupy Wall Street was like, we're too cool for party politics. Like, F the Democrats, right? And F having a leader. And it's just like, I see this time and time again, and F mainstream media. And I'm like, well, you do that at your peril. And next thing you know, you've dissolved and you have nothing to show for it. You didn't institutionalize anything. And so that's kind of my take on it is that I think the Tea Party always had the right posture. I disagree with their policies. I disagree with their ideology and what they did, but I admire and respect their strategy. And I think it was correct.
We have got Reese Peck with us today. He wrote an incredible book, Fox Populism. And, one of the things you were talking about earlier with just a second ago with leaders, there needs to be a leader. Whenever I go to various events, or if I go to a new event somewhere, I always try to ask the question. I always ask it a certain way because nobody would understand if I were to walk in and say, hey, who is the leader? Take me to your leader type of situation. So I always ask the question, who is the Vince McMahon or Dana White of this sport or this, interest or whatever? And a lot of times they'll give me a name. I know that during the Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather lead up, and even to the fight itself, I always wondered who's the guy in boxing, because you always think of Don King or Bob Arum or these guys, and the name that kept getting brought up all the time by everybody was a guy by the name of Al Heyman. Every time that they would do a press conference, they would randomly thank Al Heyman. And I'm like, who's Al Heyman? Well, then I started doing some research and found out he essentially is the guy in boxing. And in professional wrestling, it's Vince. Whether anybody agrees or not with anything that he has done in his older years, I'm sure you've read the court documents. Yeah. He's out of his mind. Dana White's the same way we were talking about with the UFC. He's, I remember, and I'm sure you probably know what UFC I'm gonna be talking about here. I remember there was an older UFC after Dana and them had taken over. Randy Couture was on a poster, and they ripped his face off the poster and replaced it with another guy's head on Randy's body because they'd had a contract dispute with Randy Couture. And there is a famous UFC poster that has Randy's body on the front, some other guy's face on Randy's body, and they went with it and went, okay, this is what we're marketing. That's the one thing with the Occupy Wall Street and with the Tea Party, is that they did not have a leader. And I think that part of the reason why the Tea Party was able to go from their beginning roots, and then all of a sudden they change direction, and Glenn Beck comes in, and also, why did they nominate Glenn Beck? Was it just because he was just, at that time, he was going through one of his many phases, and that was the phase of, he's the everyman?
Well, I mean, I think the Tea Party, I think you're very right to say, as someone that attended these rallies, I mean, I would sit in at, Ron Paul for President meetings at small pizza shops in El Cajon, San Diego area. And And in the beginning, you're right, there was an edge to it. When they use the term crony capitalism, there was some potential overlap between left and right.
Yes.
They talked about the two-headed snake as big government and big corporations.
Yes.
But eventually, Fox News cut that big.
Oh, you better believe it.
Corporation part, right? And that was. I have a segment in a piece that I do on country. John Rich and his involvement with Glenn Beck and the Tea Party, where he was performing this "Shutting Detroit Down" country song at the Atlanta Tea Party on Hannity's show, and you can literally see, and on Glenn Beck's show, you can literally see Glenn Beck be like, "Yeah, you're kind of criticizing the bankers in this song a little too much. What about the government?" Like he's coaching him to like not have that anti-corporate part, right? And I think Glenn Beck became the leader of the Tea Party. I mean, I would say that in that void, Glenn Beck and Fox News became the figurehead of the movement. And before the Tea Party popped off, it wasn't even called the Tea Party. It was called Porculus Protest. They started in Seattle.
Oh, really?
But it was when Rick Santelli on CNBC, standing in the Chicago Stock Exchange, like the least populist figures ever. These are bankers, literally day traders. Said we're going to have a Tea Party right in the lake in Chicago. Then the movement that was called Porculus, which was really against government spending. Then they called themselves the Tea Party after Santelli said that we're going to have our own Tea Party. The beginning of the Tea Party,
branding. We need branding.
Right. It was a media person that coined it, and then Hannity copied it. Glenn Beck copied it, but Glenn Beck was doing these like pre-Tea Party like events on Fox News in March before April 15th, 2009, where he'd have like rallies all across the country. He'd show them meeting up in like bars and in auditoriums.
Glenn Beck, the everyman, with his
it was like
armed Hummer or whatever he's got now.
he was doing a dress rehearsal for the Tea Party, and so it was a very symbiotic media movement creature. It wasn't one or the other. It was kind of connected, and I think it was kind of smart that way. But like I said, they went from a legitimate concern that most Americans were pissed off about, which was bailing out Wall Street. Right, that was the heart of it in the beginning, which progressives could get on board with. They were pissed. That's what Occupy was partly.
Yes.
But then notice by shifting from the beginning to March and April, by the time they get to August, what are they talking about? Obamacare. They're talking about a totally Republican, anti-government healthcare argument, and they totally lost all that edge that they had in the beginning that was about corporate power, about lobbying, or about the banks. That all went away. That all went away by the time you get to 2010s, and then, we're off to the races after that. It's just a partisan movement.
Well, we are about out of time here with the incredible Reese Peck. Fox Populism is a book that you need to pick up. It is absolutely amazing. Read his article on thehill.com about the right wing and the UFC, the MMA world. What is next for you, my friend? What? Before we let you go, what do you have coming up?
Well, it's funny you've been mentioning the Young Turks. I have an article that I published last year that shows that you can have such a thing as left-wing media populism. And I use the Young Turks as a case to kind of shake liberals' heads and say that this is possible. You don't have to have this middle-brow NPR and MSNBC style. And so I'm increasingly interested in the prospect of kind of left populist media that speaks to audiences that current progressives are not reaching. Rural audiences, working class audiences.
Yes.
So, I want to find cases where that exists, explore ideas where, new projects where it doesn't exist but could. And so I'm increasingly interested in the prospect of left-wing media populism. And so that's what I'm after right now.
Well, that is awesome. Well, I will have to say that is one thing that the left, like I said, I went to several Bernie rallies. I was involved with a radio project at one point where they had gotten press passes to go to a Bernie rally in Oklahoma, And I said, this is awesome. Maybe we can get an interview with Bernie, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, no. We're just going to go hang out at the rally and then go swim in the hotel pool. Yeah. So nothing ever got produced. But I really think that if the left could claim that populism part of it, because it works with TYT. It works with guys like David Pakman. I think what happens is people see all this other stuff and they go, well, they think NPR and they think, well, that's left-wing media. That's not left-wing media.
Exactly. And they, and like you said, the Bernie example, what's so frustrating is whereas the right and the Republican Party support YouTubers that are conservative and they go on their shows, after
the guy with the stupid hat. What the hell's his name? The IRL guy with the dumb beanie hat.
Oh, Tim Pool.
That's it. Yeah. Tim Pool.
They'll go on those shows. The major political candidates in the Republican Party will go on those shows.
Yes.
You don't see the same on the left. Democratic politicians only go on mainstream legacy news outlets. They don't support independent progressive radio or independent progressive YouTube.
Yeah.
AOC was on the Young Turks 36 times and then she won and she never went back. Right? She's never returned to the independent progressive media that was critical to her campaign. And so it's very frustrating that the only one that really does this is Ro Khanna. He's like the only progressive that will go on and support. So in other words, there's a role that the political party plays in propping up independent progressive media, right? But it's the right understands it, the left doesn't. I know I'm a broken record.
No, you are preaching to the choir here, my friend. That is definitely something. Reese, before we let you go, how do people get in touch with you online, social media, everything?
So my Twitter handle's @PeckReese. And you can look me up there. I have a website, reesepeck.com, and I have a YouTube channel. You just look my name up, Reese Peck, on YouTube. It has like clips of interviews I've done, lectures I've done, and so those are 3 ways you can connect with me online.
That is awesome. Well, this has been a pleasure. I hope you've had a blast. I really appreciate you taking some time for us today. We want to thank everybody for watching us here on Free Speech TV, and we will inevitably see you next time. Well, thank you, Reese. That was a blast, baby. Thanks for